I'd like to call this special meeting of the Granville Exempted Village School Board to order. Board of Education, sorry. Can you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to this special meeting to discuss more about our taxation policy. Ms. Fielder, would you take the roll, please?
Ms. Shaw?
Here.
Mr. Crum?
Here.
Ms. Deeds? Here. Ms. Klein?
Here.
Mr. Wolf?
Here.
All right, I'm going to turn things over to you, Mr. Connolly.
All right. Well, good evening. It's good to see you all again.
We're
We're
at
at
the
our
third meeting. This is really sort of the final meeting before we start crafting the policy itself. So I'm going to kind of get through some key points today, and this is where I start to switch over to more of a dialogue where we start to ask more pressing questions and we think out loud about how things potentially could work. No homework after this one. Well, yeah, actually, maybe there will be. Depending on where we go with things. So you all have done better with your homework than most of my school board members. I had a meeting the other day and they all looked at me like I was crazy. I said, "Did you do your homework?" They're like, "What are you talking about?" Like, oh well, the homework is really, especially the affordability homework, is really important. Well, since the last time we met, there was an election, and you all probably heard, generally speaking, how everything went statewide. But I thought you might appreciate a few details. There's a handout that says OMAC on the top, which you all are a member of this organization that they can maintain election statistics. In our last meeting, I showed you the number of districts in the state that were on the ballot for an income tax. It was pretty extensive. But as a result of the election, we came out with some pretty startling numbers. 79% of every issue was unsuccessful.
These are specifically school.
There's a few in here that have counties, and this is everyone, and the reason I wanted to show everyone is that basically voter sentiment is about the same for the universe. So schools, counties, cities, everyone did pretty poorly. Like on, the page, there's no page number, but they're midway through, there's a tab that says results of sales tax questions. And so Licking County is listed in here. They were on for a 0.15% increase, but only one county was successful for a sales tax. Before that page, there's the income tax for cities and villages. Likewise, a lot of them suffered defeats as well. And think about when you're talking about villages and cities, with the income taxes, more time than not, it's for safety services, so for police and fire, which usually have, especially fire, they usually have a very, very high success rate. And to see this type of a result for municipal government is also shocking. It's like, wow. So 79% went down, 75% of income tax levies went down. This is another record. 1/3 of renewal levies went down. That is the highest percentage of renewal levies failures that I've seen in a long time. Income tax levies greater than 1% almost exclusively failed, and levies that were for a continuing period of times or even longer than 10 years failed. So really, in essence, if you were below 1% for a limited period of time, you had a much better chance at passing. The thing about all of this is that this election, in my opinion, is really hard to really base future decisions on, because this is, I want to call it a one-off. Hopefully it's a one-off. Hopefully it's not something that repeats itself. But to look at this and say, well, we'll never try to do a continuing levy, or we'll never try to be more than 1% just because of this one election, may not be the best approach. But I will say that it is clear taxpayers made a statement. The question is, why did they make this statement? And I've spent well, since our last time, I've had no fewer than 15 of these meetings, and I've been asking board members, like, in your opinion, what do you think is, as you talk to your friends and neighbors around the state, what do you think their opinions are about if they voted no, why they voted no? Just generally speaking, what are you hearing?
I think, I'm hearing, well, let me back up. I think this shows that there's definitely sentiment in the state of Ohio. People are frustrated with their taxes, and I think with an effort to try to get on the ballot, it raises that profile. And I think a lot of people, when you say, yeah, we're gonna lower your taxes, initially they're like, yeah, I want my taxes lower. But when you peel back the onion and you say, well, how are you gonna replace that money for roads and police and fire and schools? Most people, it tends to make them pause. And, I don't know, what I've read from the side promoting it, they're like, well, we'll cut government. Well, where are you gonna cut it? I mean, I don't think they have a sound argument. I'm not for more taxes. I don't know anybody that's for more taxes. But I don't hear an alternative either, so. That's what I've heard from folks.
I mean, what I'm hearing is just everything's more expensive right now. And so, to then have, the property tax thing blow up and people just to start, jumping on a bandwagon to vote no on a lot of these things that they may have traditionally voted yes on doesn't really surprise me. I mean, everything's more expensive right now. And I think there's just so much uncertainty that why sign yourself up for more expenses, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sure, about the same thing, or your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, very similar. If you're trimming your budget at home already and you have, any impact on your county or state, local municipality budget, you're gonna make a point to get to the voting box and cut that as well, or at least not renew or add to it. So, if we had about 23% out, statewide national turnout for this election, the point was made that those 23% said no more.
And that's even more evident with the number of renewals that went down. So usually, the renewals do pretty well. I mean, I'm not half surprised that new money stuff failed, but when you see that happen with renewals, that's a further indication when people are like, I'm tired of paying more and more and more, and going out there. Did anybody else hear anything that is any different than these things? I mean, typically, mostly what I've heard is the cost is, on top of the gas prices and everything else, the frustration around the press coverage on tax reform and the constitutional amendment has spilled its way into homes, and people are just feeling really agitated, I guess, about the whole thing. The other thing that I found interesting, because I had a lot of clients that were about, and we talked about this issue of value, like the value proposition. There's just a handful of districts around the state that are actually getting younger, not older. And the state as a whole is getting older. I had a client that, said if you don't support the state,
We're going to cut various things. We're going to cut busing. We're going to cut all-day kindergarten. We're going to cut and so some of the meetings I attend, I have a nice group of people from the community sitting to weigh in with their opinion. And one of the people in the room was retired, and they said, frankly, I didn't appreciate the threat, and secondly, I don't care if you cut all-day kindergarten because it doesn't impact me. So, we talked about the value proposition early on, and when it used to work to be able to say, I remember once I worked with Licking Heights, and the superintendent there once actually listed the name of the teachers that were going to get riffed if they didn't pass the levy. I thought, yikes, but it worked. They passed the levy, and the kids were coming to the school crying that their Mrs. Jones was going to get fired, and it was, so I think those days are kind of past us now, and you really have to find a different approach to having people, realize that this isn't about what you can take away from them if they don't support you. It's about what you can give them if they continue to support you going forward. But interestingly, the the districts that fared better would be the rural school districts, and the smaller school districts seem to do better. And I think that's because the sense of community becomes an overriding factor, you know. And we talked about, when we were talking about your value proposition, what is it that makes Granville unique and special? There's a sense of pride in the community that doesn't always exist in larger communities and things like that. So I think that really will help you. I also, on the next slide, our last meeting, we talked about trying to compare how home values have changed over time versus the cost of the school's taxes over time, to sort of evaluate the relationship between the cost of the school district's taxes and the value of homes. Now, there is no perfect analysis to do this because there are many factors that come into play with home prices. But you have to agree that a school district, a good school district, has some impact on home values. So you remember the last time we talked about looking at a comparison of how home values have changed. So I just picked the median home. You know, that's, to have everybody's home in here and measure it would be a little challenging. But in 2010, the median home value was $254,000. That same home is now $472,000, and that I just kind of simplified the process of how much the homes are going up in value every year compared to what the school's overall taxes have been. So if you look at, you know, back to this question of just investment in your property alone, so not to mention that the children get a great education, you know, the school has lots of other value other than just home value. The cost versus the return has been pretty significant if you look at it just purely on that basis. Because we had talked about, you know, how the value of your school district really is, you know, the community that it creates. I mean, you have to acknowledge that this is a really critical part of what Granville as a community, not just the village, but as a community, is made up of, and this is a part of it. So I wanted to just kind of put together so you can see that relationship over time. And I think that by any measurement, that's a reasonable outcome. Keep in mind, we had a couple of recessions in here, and the home values were depressed for quite a period of time. You can see early on, between 10 and 15, the numbers didn't grow nearly as rapidly as they have since 2016. So the question is, will good, solid schools continue as long as everything else stays the same, globally speaking? Will that continue to be a good investment for residents of the community? And I think that the answer to that is probably so. So I want to provide that. The next slide, I want to go back and give you a recap over the things we touched on last time, because we're going to start to set this up for the policy itself. I think we were all in agreement that when it's time to do comparables for the school district, we'll use a mix, that mix that we looked at last time, that is your neighbors, but also some of the other wealthier communities that are located in central Ohio as well, so that we've got next door neighbor comparisons and somewhat regional, more affluent school district comparisons as our basis. You guys are okay with that particular look? Just to recap the value propositions, basically, because the policy starts out with an objective to provide something of value to your community, and because that's what your taxes don't just pay teachers. Your taxes create something that your residents are paying for. And we're gonna the draft will be words that we can edit as we go along. But are you guys in agreement that we're focusing on being a quality district that targets good performance, better, or should I say good performance or excellent performance, and to a degree continues to remain a component of the identity of the community through the things that you do to improve the quality of life? Those be reasonable factors?
I think keep in mind as we go through this process, right, we have quite a development south of town that's weighing on all of our minds.
Yes.
So as we go down this list, we're thinking about potentially the addition of that neighborhood to our schools. And so how we outline this, that will change it quite significantly.
We had a whole
I've set this up today where we have, we're going to have a time to discuss that and how that all fits in, because it's, you know, it's a big issue for you all. And the tax policy, the thing is that certain activities like that will have a direct impact on tax costs for your existing residents. And you're trying to establish rules and guidelines for what decisions you will make that may or may not impact your current residents, not future residents, but the current residents. So we'll come back to that. The fund balances.
To your point, like, I love the concept, but the quality, typically when you're getting into the funding conversation, really gets broken down into a lot of subcategories of how do you define quality. The fact that, you know, we have a world-class musical program department, you know, that represents an element of quality. Our athletics are an element of quality. Our whole child perspective is an element of quality. Even down to our food service is an element of quality. So that gets broken down even more specifically, and I think is an advantage to us in the value proposition.
And what I would like to do is.
So every district, you know, this is your policy. You can word the things the way you know that you feel like is best reflects your values, the way you see things. Keep in mind that one of the purposes of the policy is so one of your residents can actually read it and see, hey, this is why we're paying taxes here. So sometimes it does help to have a little more description about the areas that you really strive to provide higher level quality to. I have, again, having done this a few times, some places, they really want to remain very, very generic and very, you know, and I feel like I want to encourage people to really be bold in the statements that you make. And don't be afraid of saying, we're going to try to do these things. Even if you fall short, at least you're trying to do the things, you know. And I get back to why so many people are voting no anymore. It's like they're disconnected from what it is you're trying to do for them in the value proposition. Your fund balances are, you have a general fund balance policy that we talked about a little bit last time. I'm going to spend a little more time on that today. Is the press in the room at all? Okay, I know we've got the camera going. So the discussion on the fund balances is a very important discussion, because there are people, if you recall our last meeting, there are people that have assigned themselves the experts on how much is too much, who don't run this school district, right? And we have to be sure that we take that responsibility back from those people, because they will randomly assign some limit to how much cash you have to say that you have too much based on some kind of methodology that is most likely flawed. And we're going to put forth what we believe makes good sense for this district, and then also a plan when there's a day where you have more than what that number should be, how to best use it so that someone else isn't dictating to you how to best use it. So we'll talk about that in a second. The fund balance itself, and when I talk about the fund balance, right now let's sort of think about the general fund and you put the money, some additional money in the capital projects fund. So let's sort of think about those dollars in aggregate, even though they're in two different funds. The purposes of fund balances, there's actually real purposes for them, and people don't even know it. Primarily is to provide money that you need to pay your bills on a regular basis. You all have you're unlike a lot of districts in that your income comes in largely in two chunks a year, because you do not receive a lot of state funding. Your money is coming from local taxpayers, which usually comes in at 2 points during the year. Well, during the rest of the months of the year, you've got money going out and very little money coming in. So you have to have enough cash to cover the outflows in the years that, or in the months that you don't have money coming in. Today, that's not a problem because you have ample balances, but you won't always have ample balances. which we're moving in that direction. Not that it's the end of the world right now, but you should always have a minimum reserve that will keep you whole an entire 12 months of the year. And that's usually 60 days of cash, which some people were saying that should be your number, which is really poor math. The next part is if you have any type of exposure to a specific type of taxpayer or an industry. So imagine that you have a General Motors facility here or some type of large property taxpayer, which we do not. That can be a risk factor that you should have a reserve for. You do have a concentration of homes, and I've worked in a few school districts that had natural disasters. Ohio is notorious for tornadoes. And from time to time, natural disasters can occur and can have some impact on a community like this one. The question is, how likely is something like that, and should you ever have a reserve in the event that there's a disruption in the ownership of property or the condition of property that might interfere with your income? In fact, and I'm not just sort of saying this as David's own thing, the rating agencies have now added that when you do a bond issue, you get a rating for your bonds. The rating agencies have now added to their risk factors environmental risks, which would include hurricanes because of all the hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, all of that. So your fund balance, think of your fund balance as trying to at least have a little bit set aside so you don't find yourself caught off guard. Extraordinary events, which we call rainy day. Rainy days are, and we'll go into this today, it's hard to predict when they will happen, and it's hard to predict how bad they will be, but they usually happen as a result of economic situations that come along. And so I use a method of just simply going back 10 years and saying, what's been the worst experience you've had financially over the last 10 years, and then bringing those 2 years together. So if you have a down year in 1 year from a revenue perspective and a significantly high year from an expenditure perspective, bringing those together to happen on paper in the same year and asking the question, do you have enough cash to survive that rainy day? So we can assign a rainy day to that. And then there's levy renewal risk, which you all have, and it's pretty significant. So levy renewal risk is if you're one of the 30% of the school districts that could not get their levy renewed, how long might it take you to get, A, never wait till the last minute, first rule of thumb. B, if it takes a little longer than expected, how much of that renewal amount should you have tucked away to help carry you? And it's not, you don't kind of wing it. You sort of say to yourself, okay, so Brittany, remind me that income tax brings in about how much?
7 million, it's 20% of our revenue.
Yeah, so 20% of your revenue, so
7 million.
7 million. So the first thing you would look at is, okay, what's the likelihood your voters would not be supportive of a renewal? And if you remember the analysis I showed on your voter support, the last session that showed that you have increasing voter sentiment, so that's a positive. That's what we had here. That graph that after the election history. The second is, the aging of the community. That may not work in our favor, but it's there. And then secondly, and then third is just like the overall election history. So you had like 67% overall history voter support, which suggests that everything else being equal, most likely voters will be supportive of a renewal. Now this past election is again, back to this outlier situation. We're not able to predict an Iran, we're not able to predict the Venezuela situation, we can't predict those things. But if absent that, most likely you would pass a renewal. So you wouldn't need to keep in my opinion, an entire year's worth of that renewal as a reserve, but some smaller percentage makes sense. So when we start talking about the fund balance, think of the 60 days plus risk, plus you build up that risk number to make sure that you're in the right spot. Then we have legislative risk, which we're living through in real time. And I had a school district, Springboro, call me, they're a client, and they're, because of the change to the, what did you call that term again? The piggyback. They lost $1.7 million of tax collections this year. And their fund balances are not very deep. So now that we're in this environment where there's a potential for unexpected legislative impact, not the constitutional amendment, because that game over, right? We just pack up and go home if that happens. But for the lawmakers themselves who are continuously still working on things, would it make sense to have some additional reserves for the unknown related to that? The answer is yes, and Brittany can work through that. The last part is sort of where you are right now, and that is your fund balances are providing you the ability to stay off the ballot. So once you meet all the other objectives, it's kind of your savings account that you can draw from to keep the lights on so you don't have to go to the voters. And the sustainability portion of those balances is not a defined number today, but should be for the future. Because if put yourself in a position of a lawmaker who thinks that you have too much money, you want to be able to clearly show that individual that this money is serving a purpose, and that purpose is it meets our cash flow needs, it protects us from these risk factors, and the rest of it is there so that we can support the operations of the district for a longer period of time without going back to the voters. And the policy is designed to lay that out so that if challenged on your balances, you can just simply say, here's our policy. It states those things for you to consider. So any thoughts about any of that? This is more a recap, but okay. Moving to the next slide, I wanted to start talking about the fund balance policy. You all recall that today you have a minimum of 90 days cash with a maximum of up to 160 days cash. Historically, you've averaged over the last decade about 90 days of cash on average, but you're a school, so it kind of moves around a little bit. Fortunately, it was not that much until you were able to pass your income taxes. So you were dangerously low, I should say, prior to the income tax coming along. In terms of the policy, the board at any time, so you have an income tax today, 20 years from now, you may have something else. Generally speaking, it's always better to have continuing levies, if you can get them. So, two parts to that statement. Great to have if you can get them. The reason it's great to have is that you don't have to keep cash on the sideline in the event that you can't renew the levy. And depending on the amount that you keep as a reserve, I had one client that had 4 temporary levies that were close to $10 million. So they were always sitting on $5 million of cash because they had no idea which of the levies, and it wasn't a community where people loved the schools either. So I was thinking, wouldn't it be great where you could put that money to use with kids as opposed to just letting it sit in the bank account? So optimally, the policy will say, you have the choice of saying, we would like all of our levies to be continuing if possible. But I'm curious if you have any views about that, because I have another client that said that they actually like going back to the voters periodically as a way of knowing that the community thinks they're doing a good job. So what do you think about that?
The community likes us going to them to let us know that we're doing a good job or not. Whether we like it or not might be a different story.
Yeah, I would agree. Continuing is not what we heard the voters wanted for Granville the last go around. I would actually feel more comfortable going back early on a 5-year levy, going back at year 3, because we can show that the need is there, as an example.
Yeah, I agree. We got a resounding no on the continuing.
Yeah, I feel like it's different when it's talked about in the context of property tax versus income tax. Because I think the income tax was newer. I think we kind of wanted to establish the credibility of that funding mechanism, but we have traditionally done continuing property tax levies.
Yeah, that's the only levy you have this.
Yeah, that's the only mechanism we have, and they view it differently. because maybe the permanency of their own home versus the permanency of their income.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think that that might be slightly different within the tax base, but that's just my read on that.
Now, I don't know that we've ever, strategically worded something, like the example that you gave where somebody's got $5 million just sitting there in case, we aren't able to renew something, and wouldn't it be nice to be able to deploy that out to serve kids, right? That wasn't an angle that I believe, we took, but I also don't know that we had that. You know what I mean? I don't know that we had, had a bucket of money that was just, quote, sitting there, you know what I mean?
Well,
Not
there is
designated, but I think-
outside of a handful of districts that actually, articulate that into
Right.
the community, so.
Right, I mean, and
It
again,
it did play a role in the fund balance calculation, because, basically the way I came up with the thresholds is exactly how David described it. And so because we have a levy that renews, that does increase the amount of cash that we hold. So it's not like this amount is specifically tied to the income tax necessarily. But I do know that we didn't do certain things before the income tax was renewed that probably did cost us more money to do later because we had to wait until it was renewed. So again, there's not a specific income tax pot of money, but it absolutely does cost us over time. That helps.
yeah, I just don't know that we ever took that angle when
No.
we were, kind of campaigning that thought, the continued income tax levy. But it was a pretty resounding no the last time we talked about it, so.
The options, by the way, I'll share something with you that a lot of communities don't know. Income taxes are subject to repeal, they're eligible to be repealed every 5 years. So in any community that has a continuing income tax, the community can get signatures, put it on the ballot for repeal once every 5 years. So they actually do have a mechanism. I'm not recommending that you do a continuing for that purpose, but it's information that most governments are unaware of, and that folks can do that.
In that case, would the group that's seeking the repeal be responsible for the cost of that election?
No, the board would have to cover the election cost.
Of course.
Yeah, they could, if they get eligible signatures, you would have to do the same process that you do to put a new tax on and cover the cost of the election.
Can they do that for other governmental agencies?
In different ways, but yes, every tax, I have a class that I do on understanding Ohio taxes. Every tax outside of the inside village and outside of voted bonds are subject to be repealed at the discretion of voters. There are different mechanics to execute it, but that's why I tell communities all the time that when people are complaining that their taxes are too high, I'm like, well, you actually have the power as a citizen to repeal the taxes. You don't have to wait on the state to do it. Whenever I say that, people don't say that out loud, but it's true. We have, for the vast majority of taxes, you can simply get the signatures that are needed to be on the ballot. So every government has a different timeline that you can do these things, but you can absolutely repeal them, except for all the ones that are assigned by the state constitution. And that one, you have to do what the other folks are. So inside millage is a constitutional assignment of taxes, so you have to adjust that law to do it. What are your thoughts about, not recommending, again, this conversation, income taxes can be done in any increment, so you can do a 1-year income tax, which would make no sense, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, or continuing. What would be your thoughts about trying to extend the period from a 5-year to a 10-year, or somewhere in between, or somewhere around that? Because again, the election results seem to prove out that as long as people have a period of time, where it's finite, they might be more supportive. But a 10-year window is easier to navigate than a 5-year window of the renewal cycle. Any thoughts, just feedback from the community? Do you think it has to be 5 years to be successful?
So personally, I would recommend a 5-year for this next renewal, so that we're sure it gets renewed. Once we get through that, then maybe we could look at doing something different, but I just think this next renewal is so vital that we don't really want to risk extending it at the cost of losing it.
I agree 100%.
Mhm.
And the next superintendent will have the luxury of potentially expanding that to, no, but I agree. I think because of the volatility of right now, they know that we're on kind of a 5-year cycle. We don't want to rock that boat. But I do think something a little bit longer is also advantageous for this community as well, because you do get voter fatigue. Even though if you're voting to renew, it's just fatigue, because it's now signs and conversations and all those things that people have to do, versus, creating a cycle that makes sense, build an understanding of the cycle, and then, then you're almost proactively building the appropriate response at the ballot box, because people understand the cycle that you've created and the why behind it, and do it now, like we're doing, and promote it and talk about it and say, this is what we're intending, and then point back to it and say, this is what we intended. So, I think that always makes more sense to me.
So I think what I'll do.
I was just gonna add, excuse me, that this last levy, people made it really clear they were comfortable with 5 years. They could live with 5 years and support it.
Yeah.
There was some, I'd like to call it healthy skepticism, but when we told them, okay, we hear you, and the levy committee was, and they were able to sell 5 years. We were able to sell that without a lot of opposition to it.
And we had former opposers join us
Yes.
in the campaign, which I think was very telling. We heard them, and they said, if you make this 5 years, I will support it, and they absolutely walked the
did.
walk.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that was very telling, of our community.
So I think for the policy, we'll use language that says sticking with the 5-year, the rationale, sticking with a 5-year levy, that's what the community is expecting of the board, and that will be the path forward unless something significantly changes.
Yeah.
I think that-
Perfect.
Yeah. So I can put that in there. And this is what I really appreciate about the dialogue back and forth. It's amazing when I do these and people don't even have an answer. When it's like, what do you think? Like,
Yeah.
how do you not know? Well, you're a community.
We've all been involved.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, I mean,
so
our
your board are
board,
really connected, which
I
is.
look at the board members here, and everybody's worked really hard at various times on levies, taking leadership positions and.
And not just with the school district, but
Right.
with the rec and,
Yeah.
library, and, there's been lots of things that.
But, very good. So I'll be sure, because our next meeting, before the next meeting, I'll email to Brittany and Jeff the draft of the policy. Just promise me it's a draft, and that it's only there to get the wheels turning, and then you all start to fill in what you want to talk about when you get to it. Because I send it out, and some people are like, no, David. Okay, so the key.
Obviously, we recognize that having a continuing levy would in fact be great, but that's not the way we're going to do things. The way is to provide the community what they're expecting. It gives you the feedback that you need every 5 years.
I wonder if we should say that, though, in the policy. Like, we acknowledge and recognize that it would be, better, more financially sustainable, or something like that, to have it for a continuing period of time. However, we recognize the community's desire, or something like that, just so that it is recognized in policy that from
It's
a
not
financial.
optimal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
We're kind of talking about the income tax, but.
We are.
So the other side of that is the property tax. And so I think we have a different approach with that. So, I mean, going back to what my previous comment was, so I think we should have an equal articulation of property versus income.
Okay, yeah, what a great idea.
Oh, yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay. So the next bullet, I'll try to capture all this in the draft when it comes out. So back to one of the objectives of the policy itself is saying what decisions can we make that will help us stay off the ballot long term. And there's not a ton of options. The key is that you want to have property taxes that grow over time, if at all possible, and if you're lucky enough to have an income tax, which you do, be able to continue to have that grow over time. And where we sit today, you have limited, so you've got a little bit of your income coming in from an income tax, so 20% of your budget. Your inside millage is not a huge amount of money. It's split between operations and the PI, but it will grow at the newly capped rate of inflation. So you're a little better off than most schools, but still significantly far away from a really perfect system. So in looking at that, these are not recommendations, just thoughts about how do you get to that position. Inside millage and income tax levies are a positive. Getting back to the 20 mil floor is also going to be I keep saying getting back. Were you ever at the 20 mil floor? Okay. Getting to the 20 mil floor, assuming, just making a general assumption that there will be one in the future. You know, they're trying to figure out a way to get rid of that. But if we can accomplish those things through policy by saying this is objectives that will help us stay away from the voters, then that would make some sense. And then as a reminder, your property values and your income levels in this community have grown pretty significantly over the last 30 years. So 6.1% annual average growth on property values and almost 6% on income over this time frame. So sort of imagine your revenues coming into the school districts adjusting each year at about those numbers would really help you to be sustainable, especially with that last bullet. I just finished some data, which we'll look at on the next slide. Your spending over the last decade has been about 4.25%. Your non-discretionary, so you've had some, Brittany alluded to the fact that with the income tax, you were able to spend some money to do some things. But that was purely discretionary, where you were like, okay, we can spend a little more now with that we have some breathing room. When I take a look at your financials, and this is the next slide, it's coming. What's going on? There we go. I am not going to punish you and make you go through every one of these numbers, but what I want to point out, so I do an analysis independent of Brittany just to make sure that, we're universally speaking, everything is about right, because I don't know if I told you once before, she's one of the sharpest treasurers in the state. Have I mentioned that? Okay, well, if I haven't, let me mention it again.
International.
And so, but I still do a separate analysis just to make sure. There are some folks that are, don't do these kind of things as well as others, and so it's helpful to have a separate set of eyes. So part of the analysis that is designed to first just figure out, do we have any significant variations in your revenue or spending that rainy day thing, like, okay, how much risk is there? Is there a lot of volatility? Because there are districts that have quite a bit of volatility in their funding. You have the worst performing year that you had was in 2019, where your income was down a little bit. And it really wasn't down. There was some collection of taxes the timing was off. So there was, if you come over here, this number wasn't as high as it should have been, and then they got paid, somebody paid late, and it really accelerated that, which made the next year, which was more normal, look like a decline. But I'm using that as a worst case scenario. So back to, sometimes you've got these inconsistencies of cash flow where you need reserves when it happens. Then you have the levy kick in and you can see the increase. But the point is that over time, over this period, your income has grown at about 4% a year on average. So you've been able to keep up, but that includes the passage of the income tax that's in here. On the expenditure side, everywhere you see these little red marks, those are years where you actually decided to spend more money than usual, right? So there are transfers out for one reason or another, and
Question, so for 20 and 21, I know that's income tax, but as well, was there any COVID money that bumped that up that would then skew the 4%?
No, this is general fund only, right?
Yeah, this
Okay,
is the
okay.
general
All right,
fund.
thank you.
Yeah, so you all,
it's such a pleasure to work with people that do their stuff the right way. There are places that commingled a lot of COVID dollars and things in there, and it makes the numbers like this, and it's almost impossible to get a baseline for reasonable financial performance. You guys have done things very clean, and the transparency is fantastic. I was able to just sort of go back and say, okay, we have an increase here of 6.46, and then there was a 7.37. In this particular year, there was an intentional increase in pay for benefits and payroll. There was some additional purchase service increases that were higher than the year before that could have been a book adoption, things like that. But overall, your spending over the last decade is 4.22% out of the general fund, which is really reasonable considering the type of educational programs that you provide. You know, I mean, if I were to show you that number for the other high-performing districts, they would be spending at a higher clip than what you guys are spending at. So the goal is, well, whenever you're looking at revenues, you want this number to be as close to this number as possible. So if 4.22% is where you need to be to kind of support future operations, you want your revenues to grow on average at least that. So back to the conversation about property taxes and the rate of growth, it being at the 20 mil floor, and income taxes, those numbers combined keep you right about where your spending pattern has been historically, and would put you in a position of being fairly sustainable if you could get to those two benchmarks long term. The other thing is just the fund balances overall. This is the year that you transferred some funds out. Collectively, you could see, if you come over here, I don't know how you guys are surviving in 2020, but you're on life support.
The cash balance policy, that's the year we use as our worst case scenario, because we had already planned for a transfer out for our athletic complex project, so our expenditures were high, and the state cut our funding in the last 2 months of the fiscal year because COVID, and they never gave it back. So it was our actual lowest revenue and expenditure year combined into 1 year, so that really was our worst case.
so where we sit today, this is just
The
the
actual
actual,
general fund, if you added in your additional reserves, you would be 170, 180 days, just under your upper threshold. When I did the analysis on that, that's in terms of having the range of money for cash flow purposes plus your add-ons for risk factors, that's exactly where your upper and lower limits should be. So she's spot on right there. And again, depending on how much, if the general attitude of voters across the state, when's our renewal up? Okay, so, yeah, that's where you're going. But is it expired? 28. So if the general attitude of voters isn't improved by 28, then I would suggest that the upper limit, the reserve limit, might actually be higher than 190, because that's a big number if you're not successful. But for now, the upper and lower limits are where they need to be.
190, or you think we should go to 190 at that point?
No, well, you shouldn't be. Oh, I'm sorry, 160. 160. I don't know why.
Or higher than that?
Yeah. So.
Should that be in the cash balance? I'm sorry, should that be in the policy?
So the policy.
Out from a levy
the policy will address that you have a fund balance
Okay.
policy, and that the goal is to stay within the range that's described in the fund balance policy, except in the event that there are circumstances that increase the risks associated with renewing the levy. And then the policy says that the fiscal officer is supposed to report to the board on an annual basis. Well, the policy is undrafted, but it will say one of them or both of them will come to the board. The policy requires a presentation to the board once a year to update all of this. Like, this is how well we're doing, or this we're not doing so hot, and these are the factors that we promised that we would try to achieve. What would you like to do? And then the board will say, come back with some ideas. You give them 90 days to come back or less. They come back and say, we think we should increase the balance policy, the reserve policy, those kinds of things. And it serves two purposes. Again, you always want the ability, if someone doubts or questions that you have too much money, you want to show them that you have a system that measures, a verifiable system that no one can doubt, that measures these factors and actually has actions associated with it, so that you can show them this is, it's in black and white here. But that would be the key. So right now, I think your numbers are right. The range is right. Everything is good. But let's fast forward to a day where something wonderful happens, and you have more cash than 160 days, and which we kind of do right now. And this is full conversation. So the policy intends to have you describe, on the day that you have more than what we deem to be a reasonable range, what should you be doing with the amount above that range? And the conversations that I usually have start with, in your opinion, should you have a priority for, let's just say you have an extra $5 million above the range. Should there be a priority for what you use the $5 million for? I had a school district where the board did not want priorities. They just wanted to identify the choices of how they would use it. I kind of like priorities in a way. This is my opinion, but future board members will be sitting at your desk, and I say this because I have a client where they have a sizable balance, and I hate to use the term surplus, but they have a sizable amount of money above their upper range, and the current board's like, oh, we just want to build an athletic facility. I think I shared this story with you guys. And I was on the phone with them today. The price of this athletic facility is getting higher and higher and higher and higher. And this is one of the worst performing school districts around. And I'm like, wouldn't it be better to try to spend a little bit more money over here with the kids? And they're like, well, it's just one of the items on our list of priorities. So I think if you have a priority list where the first thing is that we want to spend extra money to improve something for the kids, whether it's well-being or educational opportunities or programming or support, that makes a statement. It says, okay, and then to the extent you've met those objectives sufficiently where the board is in agreement, we've done, I don't know if I asked you today, do you feel like you could spend more money on the kids for one thing or another if you would think there's something left to be done? Jeff, is there other stuff that you'd like to be able to throw some money at versus, so how do you all feel about actually having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus this is just the list of things that we could choose to use the money for?
I guess I prefer buckets, like these 3 things would be the priorities, but given circumstances at that exact point in time, maybe one of those top 3 were more important than the other. I hate to have a very distinct priority list, because if our circumstances presented something different at that time, I'd hate to be held to that, or for any future board members to be held to that.
And for me, having lived through almost 8 years of deferred maintenance and understanding that had we paid for those things then, it would have been half the cost. my goal is, and we have older facilities, constantly reinvesting in our physical assets to pay at the lowest possible point, which is now.
Right, I agree.
Because it only gets more expensive. So that has to be, and that sounds bad, that I would say that's priority A, but I already know that we do a lot of great things with the operating dollars to educate our students now. The expansion of services will be much more surgical at that point versus the magnitude of the facility issues. That's just my perspective.
Yeah, investment in facilities and ongoing operations to me are kind of the same
Yeah.
thing, because I think of maintenance of facilities as part of operations. I get that it's not, but to me, those are kind of the same, so I would put those kind of equal.
But when I read
In the same
investment in
bucket.
facilities, I read building something we don't need.
Oh, yeah, no, that's,
So,
yeah,
but-
that one, yeah.
But I'm 100% supportive
And we
of
could
like,
create a subset, this was just to sort of get you thinking about generalizations. You could have like truly required maintenance and repairs versus,
Yeah.
new facilities.
Yeah,
correct.
Existing
Yes.
facilities versus new facilities.
hockey rinks,
Right.
It's a great idea.
However.
Yeah.
I would think this conversation comes into play when we are forecasting a surplus maybe in our 5-year budget. Our current 5-year budget, even with a renewal, is not showing us even coming close to the upper end of our cash balance policy.
Yeah, but the policy though is a 100-year
Yeah, I would-
policy that
Yeah.
if the day were to come where you 20 years from now and there's
Yeah.
excess money, what would be the best? Basically, you're appointing yourselves as the smartest board members to have served this district. So in your opinion, what you think the best use of those monies would be? So, it's helpful, Jeff, that you said what you said, because you could start with, to the extent some of the key, really expensive deferred maintenance items are dealt with, then any one of these things, or sort of in this particular
I
order.
also wonder if you have to like even take a step back, because we're talking about this as if it's today.
Right.
Like, what if we have to make a bunch of cuts because the income tax doesn't get renewed and we've eliminated XYZ thing, but then we get more money in the future? Well, then expansion of services probably does become your number one, because you're gonna add back some of
That's
those
kind of
things.
what
So
she
like,
said,
yeah, you
yeah.
gotta have
I
like
think we should have like clusters
baseline
or
or
things,
something,
right?
yeah. Or if this, then that,
Yeah.
kind of decision.
Yeah, I can very easily set it up where there's there's not a single priority, but these are among the most important things that we would address. I mean,
Right,
this
Group
is-
A would be addressed first,
Uh-huh.
and then Group B, or, other items or something like that.
And like, the other side of the equation is, you've done deferred maintenance really well, but I would actually love to be in the proactive space of creating new sources of energy efficiency and optimization. So like, I mean, we would be a perfect EV bus district because our boundary supports that. If we could create a facility that has the plug-in buses that, we can convert, and we save the aggregate long-term cost on those types of things, you get into the proactive expenditure of money versus the reactive. And those would be things that I think this community would support too, or as well.
I have to put in that I think we need to have something in there about staff, whether it's support for staff, some kind of lower, it doesn't have to be specific, but lower class sizes, something around the actual heart of the district and the people who make it such an impressive district. I don't know exactly how to word that, I don't know what bucket, I don't know anything like that, I just have to put it out there.
Well, what I can do is I can experiment with some language. The bit of a challenge sometimes is putting that in a policy, and then the union shows up.
Yeah, but
Right.
we have guidelines, I mean, we talked about it openly in negotiations. Listen, we're not contractually obligated to be at those levels, we're doing that because we know that that's in the best interest of education and the students and the teachers. So, like, we can put language in that doesn't tie our hands, but we've always said to the association, listen, the minute you put it in there is the minute it becomes at risk.
Yeah.
So, let us, we have 15 years, 16 years, 20 years of doing it the right way
Yeah.
with the parameters that we've set. But we can put them into something that we're creating as a board document to say, listen, these are some of the things that we value.
Lifelong learners, I mean, I'm thinking not necessarily, how are we supporting educators to continue their education? Again, not monetarily, but the vibe, right? Like, this is what we value here. If we have extra money, we're gonna value it, a little bit more.
No, I think, just in terms of just some generalized wording, and then you all can sort of craft that before we get to the next meeting, but at the next meeting, and then kind of, because I have
There's
some.
the homework.
Yeah, I have some, I have some places that really go right to the point and, supporting teaching staff and whatever, others and other folks sort of back into it by saying those things that support a quality education for the kids and they sort of by interpretation, that means good teachers that are happy in the job, that kind of thing. But I'll put some language in that you all can find. So the policy says that the boards, this board and future boards will make their best efforts. It doesn't say we are absolutely going to make all these things come true. It's, we don't have that power, but we do have the power of best effort.
And, as long as it says this is our best effort, I think the community would appreciate it.
Well, I think this is hard for us to wrap our heads around because we aren't operating in that environment.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have a bunch of money we all of a sudden need to spend on something.
It also, this is kind of a downer meeting, and talking about taxes around school, especially in Ohio, is kind of a downer. So it is nice to have a minute to say,
I'm sure.
oh my gosh,
If we
we
have
had a
extra
ton of money,
money.
guess what? Like, okay, I can't say it on the record, but there's a lot of good things we would do for teachers, so.
All right.
The other items on here, just to make sure that these are the kind of things you would say, okay, that makes sense to have in there. Potentially, so imagine there's a day where, again, I have clients that have money where they actually pay off outstanding debt, or they are planning a new financing and they're like, we can support 10 million of this on our own. So if we need 50 million, we'll only put 40 million on the ballot and we'll pay the other 10 million. Those are, again, things that are being considerate of taxpayers. Would that language be okay? Because it doesn't commit you, it just says that we will, if it made sense, we would potentially consider that. Lowering existing taxes, and that can take, the thing about lowering existing taxes is that it actually means it can be accomplished a couple of ways. One is literally stopping the collection or reducing the collection on existing taxes. The other is, and we're going to talk about this in the next slide, converting some taxes from property taxes potentially into income taxes, which for some taxpayers would lower their taxes. So those are two things that come out of one statement. So just gonna, and then, Brittany had just mentioned the ongoing operations, which could include the maintenance of those items. The real reason that language is in there is when you have money that's beyond the required range, people will say you should give that back to taxpayers by default. It's their money, give it back to them. But what you all are doing right now, and a lot of districts are doing right now, is they're using that money to operate the school district so they don't have to go back to taxpayers. That's the other part of the sustainability formula. So if you say, okay, we've got an extra, let's say there's a day where you have 50 million and you've done some of the extra things that you want to do, and you simply say, well, we're going to sit on 30 of the 50 and just use that to live on for the next 5 to 10 years so we don't have to go back to voters. Is that a reasonable view from your perspective, that you would use it for long-term sustainability if it was available to you?
What do you think, Freddie, would be better to
Yeah,
A district that is,
Within our range, like,
Okay.
but this is above the range.
This is
I mean,
above the range. So this is.
We're making money on it, the alternative is people would make money on it, but then you're relying on them to
Give it back when
to
we
give
share.
it back, to explain it, like, it would have to take an extraordinary,
Influx.
overage of our policy for me to be like, yeah, I'm really comfortable, like, lowering the income tax for a year, because you lower it, and you increase it back up again, like, that would just be really challenging to, from a communication standpoint.
Once it's lowered, there's going to be an expectation it's going to stay.
you-
Right.
we're not a community that politically elects this board, unlike other larger communities, right? So, you know, writing a policy like that may say, well, I'm gonna be the tax event candidate, or I'm gonna be the returning to the people candidate, you know, fiscal conservative, if you will. So I don't wanna write that into a future policy to say, well, we're not gonna divide or identify how we elect our board members based on what they're gonna do with, you know,
Yeah.
a fund balance, per se.
Okay, so I will, we'll have that in there. That goes back to your point of having Group A, Group B, and then all other sort of down here, so I think we can bring that.
I'd just add, I think in our policy, we need to acknowledge somehow that the board is, we are sensitive to what the community pays and how much they pay, and, you know, somehow wordsmith that's in there.
I will put it in
If that makes sense to the board. Anytime we can acknowledge we're listening to what people say.
Yeah, much like our continuous versus,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
well,
Except we
we,
took excess funds and built
Yeah.
a field house.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That would not go over very well.
So while we try
Right,
to
yeah.
increase our days of cash on hand, you know, or recognize, right, as Fred's point is, you know, we'd like to return it to our taxpayers. That might not be the, you know,
Might not be the most responsible thing
Right.
to do
We-
for the, it might be.
but we acknowledge not to do that because it would be bouncing back and forth
Right.
between levies faster.
Yeah, yeah.
I think if we had a continuing, then it would be something, you know, and I don't know if you can like temporarily decrease it, if it's a continuing levy, if you can temporarily decrease it and then increase it without a vote or whatever, but the fact that we go back every 5 years, if there were a period where we were forecasted and we could reduce it by a little bit for that next 5 years, I mean, I think that, you know, would be enough of an acknowledgement that like, hey, listen, we ended up with extra, and so this next time we renew it, it's gonna be at a lower rate
Yeah,
or something like
yeah.
that, I mean,
my understanding is you can do it annually with income tax or property tax.
No.
I just want to avoid every year them thinking,
Agreed.
you know, we're going to lower it this year, but then next year we got to go back up to this, and I mean, I think that would do more harm than good with.
but I think then when we got to the next renewal, they'd be like, wow, the board's been really responsible that 1 year, remember they even collected less from us, so let's go ahead and renew this again, I
If
mean,
we like really amp it up as like a property tax holiday or something like
Right.
that. But I think that would make more sense if we were on the 20-month floor.
Yeah.
Or something, and we had continuous year-to-year growth, like significant growth in revenue, and we were very projecting through the whole 5-year forecast period, surplus every year.
I'm just trying to think, if 500 people had shown up at this meeting, which would have been great, and you would ask the crowd, the vast majority of them would say
Lower tax.
to lower taxes, right? And so I'm just trying to,
You're right.
and I think Fred's trying to keep that in mind too, like I just feel like the majority of our community would say, yeah, even if it was temporary, lower our taxes for a year would be great.
Yeah, this is other districts, but, you know, to your statement, so they're maintaining affordability for community residents, so these are like statements of action that we would attempt to do. Your draft will start looking a little bit like that, but the
Yeah.
language overall. So keep overall tax burdens reasonable. This one is compared to neighboring districts. In our case, we'll identify, we'll assign some name for the group that you compare yourself to. We won't fairness for tax structure adjustments, which is kind of what we're talking about. What do you do if you know, we could even put in, like if you have 2 or 3 consecutive years where balances have grown. So as opposed to like up and down, if you're like just continually getting more and more cash. Lucas Schools is a district that it's just ridiculous the amount of cash that just keeps coming in. And I'm like, you have to do something. You can't just sit on this money. And they just keep sitting on the money. But a trigger that says if we've gone 3 years and the balances just keep growing, something has to give. You know, if you're above your upper limit and you're just accumulating cash at an unreasonable amount, that's what lawmakers are really, what they're trying to get at, but they messed it all up. But there's language in here that goes on. You know, the key is that there's a process. So you establish a process that says, when we identify these circumstances, once a year, you all would collectively come to the board and say, okay, this is what's going on, what do you want to do? And the policy says you can pick from these 5 things or 6 things. Or not, you can do something else. But I just want to kind of give you a rough idea there, so let's pop back over to this.
All right, so that gives me enough to get the first draft ready to go. And then the purpose of this part of the conversation is, again, the ideas of reaching the 20 mil floor. The 2 ways to do that would be to, actually really there's just one. You can, you can move some inside millage, which would not get you to the 20 mil floor, or you could convert any of these to an earned or to a traditional income tax, which you all have at some point in the future as a global initiative. So the global initiative would be the statement that we are heavily weighted on property taxes, and one of our objectives is to reduce the property tax burden for those residents that are on fixed income, albeit high fixed income. And so what we would propose is replacing some of our property taxes with a newly added income tax. So not saying do that now, but saying that is an option. It serves 2 purposes: creates more balance in your tax structure, and for some of your taxpayers, some tax relief, and also potentially could get you closer to the 20 mil floor. So 20 mil floor tying to sustainability and an additional income tax helping with sustainability. So that's, and under Ohio law, you can shift any one of these or all of them, which wouldn't make sense, into an income tax if you wanted to do. So King's local school, they just did the same. Was it King's? Yeah, King's. They told the community, we're reducing property taxes by 4 mils and putting on a 1% income tax. So a lot of, I didn't advise them, but a lot of people thought, oh, that's a savings of 3 mils versus income tax. It passed, and so the income tax brought in more money than the 4 mils property tax, but people were like, oh, that's a great idea. So you could potentially say, oh, let's take out, these 2 levies with an income tax. The one challenge, though, is this. The state law says it's 1 ballot question to replace a property tax with an income tax, except that the income tax has to be continuing. So, if you,
I liked that idea
until that. So, the only other way to do it is you can tell voters we're doing a 5-year income tax, and we promise you that we will not collect X levies. So you pass a board resolution saying we will hereby not collect the 2010 and 2013 levies. I'm just, if you approve an additional 0.25% income tax. So they have to trust you to do that, and it is an annual process. So each year you would have to instruct the treasurer to take to the Budget Commission a requirement to stop collection on any one of those levies. Budget Commission is not going to turn you down for dropping, from lowering income taxes or property taxes. But it could be one thing to consider as part of the process of adjusting your tax system. But it does, it's going back on the ballot and saying, would you be willing to shift our current tax structure away from property taxes more toward income taxes?
I suppose the property tax is continuing, so I don't know that we'd get as much pushback if we were giving something and asking for the continuing. But we can't have more than one income tax.
Well, they just do it as an, so the one that you have now, they would just add another, whatever percentage to that one.
But
It
then
would-
it would be continuing, it wouldn't be a.
Oh, yeah, you can't do one continuing, it would be.
Have to be the same as, yeah.
So, my question is, as values continue to increase exponentially in a mega project area, there may be an ability for us to go there naturally.
No, because that doesn't, new construction valuation does not reduce the millage. So it is going, growth will drive up existing values, but not as much as you're thinking, because new
Okay.
construction
Yeah,
doesn't impact.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking in the context of new construction, I was just thinking existing stock.
Yeah, I mean,
But it would have to be exponential.
yeah,
Basically, every home would have to be over $1 million.
like, we're not expecting over the 5-year forecast.
Correct.
Even with the next rate appraisal.
Right.
Yeah, so
And also-
what you're thinking is, that ultimately, there's an organic, an organic way to get to the 20 mil floor. Your long-term projections, what would you guess, 10 years or longer? Yeah.
Because
It's
we
not
have
the
five, I
current, it's
don't-
not the current 5 years, for
Yeah,
sure.
it's not in 5 years.
Yeah,
But your previous slide said that the 25.44, which is like the magic number that counts towards the 20 mil floor, that should actually be 26.2, almost 26.3, because the library is included in that.
okay.
So that's
Makes it a
another
little bit
factor.
harder. Got it.
So the strategy, again, we're not deciding, we're talking theory. In theory, would it make sense to try to do the things that you can do to get to the 20 mil floor in your, oh, shoot.
I think this
That's if the
presents
20
another.
mil floor kicks in.
But I think this presents another continuing versus 5-year dilemma, because again, from a financial standpoint, from my perspective, yeah, the 20 mil floor is great because that gives us the growth. From the taxpayer standpoint, no, they don't want to be on the 20 mil floor. That's the whole reason why property taxes are being challenged at the state level. So it's the same issue.
Right, it's a double-edged sword, and the question is, are people, are they more apt to say, okay, fine, so once you're at the 20 mil floor, the state has now implemented.
That increase can only be at the rate of inflation. So it's, the last time people went bananas was right here. This is your residential agriculture values. It was this big increase where people got hit with this 30% increase. Well, that won't ever happen again. It's going to be whatever the rate of inflation is, let's say anywhere from 2 to 5%, which might be a little more palatable for some I'm careful to say some taxpayers, because there are taxpayers we talked about that don't make a lot of money. Would that be slightly more palatable? Maybe, but it is a double-edged sword. You can't be at the 20 mil floor and also still have taxes stay at the current level. They will go up. But what would resonate more with your community, that by doing that, it helps us not come back to you for the next 10 years, or if we don't do it, we could potentially have to come back more often. I mean, that's the give and the take. And I don't have a particular recommendation. It's just whatever one you think makes the most sense for this community. But the one nice thing, I will say, it's not nice for the revenue side, but the fact that the 20 mil floor growth, the cost side of it, is now capped to be whatever the rate of inflation is until that day comes where inflation's double digits again. Because I remember inflation being 12, 13, 14%. That just sort of is the thing. So philosophically, does it feel better to be at the 20 mil floor and avoid going back, or not being at the 20 mil floor and potentially have to go back? That's kind of the.
So how do we develop a language that really is hypothetical, because the 20 mil floor is at risk from a policy standpoint. So like, I've heard conversations at the State House that that's gonna be an 18 mil floor, or a.
Well, we could say,
Here's,
well, because I think it doesn't matter if it's 18 or 20, either that's our goal.
Whatever the
or
arbitrary
it's not.
floor.
Yeah, either we fundamentally want to get there or we don't.
yeah, so this is,
Right.
Right,
It's just a matter of how long it would take us.
yeah. In the language I've used, I said the 20 mil floor or its equivalent, whatever that
Yeah,
name might
there we
be.
go.
So again, today, this isn't you deciding, but we're gonna write something in the policy about it. I'm losing, I lost time. How did I get to where I am? Let me just, I want to jump to the most important part. And economic development, which is key. I apologize, I thought I wanted to have more time. So I want.
We still have 9 minutes.
Speak with it. Okay.
So let me frame this, because like literally, I just came from the CIC conversation. There are 3 things happening right now that involve economic development discussions, including, community reinvestment, assessments, or area. Community, area. TIFs, other things that we will be asked to opine on. And everything's situational, but if it's a project that fits the comprehensive plan, fits an economic imperative, has a short cycle impact, then we've approved those in the past, like TIFs for Kendall, now Otterbein, or H-Flex, now Orthopedic One, Middleton, retroactively. So those things we've done before in the context of the aggregate good of economic development. And I think that's the right mindset. Capturing that with the language that is, clear. We do not abate or whatever single-family residential. That's a clear, bright line. Those types of things, I think, are what we need to have discussions about. And what is the duration or tolerance for duration of these mechanisms that is palatable? Is 5-year, 10-year, 15-year. 15-year is kind of like what every developer will come in with to say, I can't get my private equity to support my project without this 15-year abatement. Every single time, that's what we hear. So how do we navigate that space and say, actually, we've done this work ahead of time. These are some of the general parameters we accept. We're more oriented towards TIFs than CRAs, or, whatever it is. I think that's something that we actually have to spend a lot of this stuff, we've kind of talked about before, these conversations we had. And that's, they've been project specific, and we haven't really, I think, spent time as a board building capacity on what those things are. And David, I think next time we meet, it would be very helpful to go through, what is tax incremental financing? What is a CRA, a community reinvestment area? What is a community authority? Just little things that, like, we can build understanding and capacity on, because there are things that are out there that I've heard and I'm going, "Oh, I don't even know what that is.
yeah.
And so I
We
think
can
that's an
start
important
the
piece.
next meeting
Yeah.
on this page. The goal, so there's two parts to it. There's the understanding the components of tax incentives. So there's this universe of tax incentives. At a policy level, though, these are the key questions that you have to answer for yourself. And the first and most important is that you're going to, at some point, you will be put in a position of either supporting economic development or not supporting economic development. And you could potentially be painted to be the bad guy because you're not
willing
willing
to
to.
forego school taxes for the benefit of economic development. So we have to start with, you know, as your position as a board member, is your responsibility to support and endorse economic development? Because there will be a day where someone says, we want to take the dollars that would be coming to your children and use that to help a developer build a particular project. And I have some clients that are simply saying no. They're drawing a line in the sand and saying, don't ask us for anything beyond what you're granted under state law. But anymore, most developers are expecting you to go above and beyond what the minimum, most abatements are 10 years long, 75%, in which case 75% of your money is given to the developer without you can't stop it. It's guaranteed to them. But anymore, some of these projects have gotten to be so expensive, they either need more than 75% of your money or longer than 10 years. CRAs can go 15 years. So we're seeing most of the incentives I'm seeing are companies through either the township, the county, or a city say, or village, say, we want 100% of your money for 30 years.
Yeah, we got it, I need to learn more about this.
Yeah, and
Because I'm like, why would we do that? But there's gotta be other reasons, there's tons of stuff that I don't know, so this is really important.
Yeah, I mean, if the employment income tax outweighs the TIF, then yes, but if you build a data center, there's only 10 people working there. So you don't get it,
Yeah.
And it-
Bigger space.
And for us specifically, you know, our income tax is a residential income tax versus a, you know, business income
But
tax.
development
But
sparks more development,
Correct.
so we give this one a
Yeah.
tip and then 10 more come or something like that. And it's finding the right mix of, if you don't give this incentive, nothing will come of it. So,
Too
to-
much.
yes.
Or at least
not
that's the
exactly.
threat, you know,
Yeah.
the threat that you'll be handed is if you don't agree, you're going to prohibit the
Yeah.
growth of job opportunities,
Yeah.
growth of the
Yeah,
region.
this sounds so
And I've
Well,
also,
and- go ahead.
I was just gonna say though, I think, and I might be misreading the public, but the amount of money that private investors are getting, taxpayer money, I think there's
There's a rebound.
a rebound, and I think as a school district, it's incumbent upon us to look what's in the best interest of the children we educate. And, I mean, I'm just speaking as an individual, I'll defend protecting the students. But I also feel like when, you know, and maybe it's apples and oranges, but when, you know, billionaires are getting money to build stadiums, there's pushback. And the environment we're in right now, you know, ties into what you started this meeting out with. So I think it's incumbent upon us, sure, you know, I think we owe it, yeah, we would, let's talk about it, but does it make sense for the district? Is it, how much will it affect the district?
Okay, so we're gonna hit pause.
I'm
Yep.
sorry.
I know that we have to do this.
Yep.
So June we are not going to meet
Oh,
because
that's right.
we have an issue, conflict.
Yeah.
July 8th, I believe Janelle has reached out to
Yeah.
everybody. We're gonna tag it on to the morning meeting
Okay.
and
Which means
extend
that we can
a
go.
little bit longer.
Oh, good. 'Cause-
Brunch.
That's what I was gonna
Yeah.
say.
Just not lemon.
I might actually like be able to make an egg omelet or a egg bake or something for you.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'll cook.
Oh,
It is recorded.
So the goal of that meeting is
To
to share
adjourn our
answers
special meeting.
for each one of these.
So look at that, that's our homework.
That's our whole, well, it's kind of hard to do this until we go through what it all means, but generally speaking, have a general view of some of these things, by the time we have it.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
All right. Aye.